Hi, so the global cooldown roller coaster goes up and down once again, with Blizzard posting the following. Yeah, we agree that having racials on the global cooldown isn't feeling great. Having to press multiple buttons in a row that don't do anything but increase throughput isn't particularly engaging. While we can resolve that issue within the context of a specs toolkit, racials, as well as unused trinkets, add another layer on top of that. So in an upcoming beta build, likely next week, we'll be taking racials and unused trinkets back off the global cooldown. Now, this raises a number of questions, but I've talked quite a lot about global cooldowns in the past, of course. What I'd like to present here is a solution which not only fixes the one problem that seems to be emerging that requires this solution, but doesn't cause any other fires that need putting out. So that statement of Blizzard's there that having to press multiple buttons in a row that don't do anything but increase throughput isn't particularly engaging also applies equally to other DPS cooldowns as well, because it's accounting for the same thing. So why one and not the other? Well, we know the reason for that, of course. It's deemed too powerful for those specs, and bear in mind there's only so many specs that can even do this, but for those specs who are capable of having several DPS cooldowns or throughput cooldowns in general, being able to fire all of them off in a single macro and then be super powerful for a short period of time is considered pretty dangerous in a PvP scenario. And I'll emphasize again, this is for PvP. And I did discuss before about putting them on the global cooldown for PvP and taking it off for PvE. That doesn't seem to be gaining any traction. I know there are some people as well who wouldn't necessarily like that, some actual players. But at the same time, how many players actually play PvE and PvP at such a high level that it would be that jarring? But anyway, that's not the solution I'm plugging here. It is a solution I've also talked about in the past, but now I'm looking at what they're saying and going, do you know what? They need to do this solution because this is a bit of a mess. So there's basically three problems with what's going on now. From when they announced it to all the concessions that have been made, three issues here. I mean, one of them is because of those concessions that's been made, there risks being, and not just risks being, there's going to be a massive disparity between the effectiveness of different classes in a given situation based purely on whether or not their pretty much identical ability is on or off the global cooldown. Blizzard have abandoned any pretense about it being for gameplay reasons. They even said in the last Q&A that they'll put this on the global cooldown and this off, even though they're basically the same thing, because actually it helps distinguish them. They then get to say it's unique abilities simply because one's on the global cooldown, one's off. Well, that's horseshit. And the second thing is that this has come up before, having short duration cooldowns in particular means that the value of haste for some specs skyrockets. And, you know, Blizzard have been trying to do a lot of work on making sure that item level doesn't get thrown out of whack by secondary stats. And they've actually done pretty well. It is looking like item level is going to be a much better indicator of item power. But something like that puts it at risk. You know, it means that some specs might just have to look for haste, even if it's an item level downgrade, perhaps even a significant item level downgrade. And we don't want to go through that. We had enough of that through Legion. And even though they improved it in Legion, they never really fixed it. And the third issue is that this topic keeps coming back. Blizzard developers are talking about it and talking about it. Of course they are, because they keep coming out with new statements. But if they're talking about that, it means they're not talking about other things. This is something where there is a really simple solution to the stated problem. And if they just did that, I am convinced that people would be happy with it and they could just move on. Because at the moment, it's constant to and fro. They know that the wider community is opposed to this. I know that there are people who are supporting it and the people who will comment down here support it. But I'm sorry. Even Method did a video talking about it. And even though the guy in it was trying to be balanced by going, oh, well, you know, maybe it'll be all right. It was always, maybe it'll be all right. But he made the point very, very clearly that nobody he knows, and this guy's in Method, these are skilled players, nobody in Method thinks that this is a good change. They don't like it. All right? Basically, good players don't like this change in PvE at any rate. I can't really speak for the PvP crowd. Although I've known people who are in the PvP crowd give varying opinions on it as well. So put in a solution that people will be happy with, and then we don't end up with things not being done in time for launch because they didn't have time to properly implement them. There's already some abilities I know that are not being put in, like notice the class buffs. That's a big thing for me at the moment. They trumpeted these class buffs things. Some classes have got these class buffs in, some have not. And the impression I am getting is that when we go to launch, some classes are still not going to have their class buffs at launch. That's a disaster. And if part of the reason for that, and it may not be related, but if part of the reason for that is because they're spending so much time discussing this when there's such a simple solution, that means they don't have time to really be working on some other things, that would be heinous. So what is my solution? Let's stop prattling. It's simply this. It's basically something they've already done for trinkets. In Legion, if you've got unused trinkets, there's no real value in having 2 unused trinkets because you use one of them, it immediately puts the other one on a shortish cooldown. So you can't use both at the same time. Now, here's what I'm proposing. First of all, DPS cooldowns, which are sort of off the global cooldown in live at the moment anyway. But I'm not just talking about DPS cooldowns. I'm talking about movement speed cooldowns and I'm talking about defensives. Blizzard talked about the need to have things that need to be reactive. They were explaining why interrupts are off the global cooldown, which of course they should be. So they explained that interrupts are reactive and therefore should be off the global cooldown. Well, movement speed buffs and defensives. Okay, in a raid, sometimes you plan for them, you know when you need to use them. But a lot of the time they are themselves reactive. Sometimes, for example, when you know a load of damage is coming in, but you're on full health, you know you don't need it. But then suddenly you lose some health. Oh, damn, need to use it. Very reactive, okay? If you can get global, you can be killed. So I need movement speed and defensive to offer global cooldown as well as DPS cooldowns. Now, the argument is, for PvP, we don't want you to be able to do all of those things at once, have your cake and eat it. Fine, let's go with that. Is the solution to put them on the global cooldown? No. I've got something that will actually prevent that even better without pissing everyone off. And that is, create a set of abilities that are off the global cooldown that would include throughput cooldowns, movement speed, and defensives. They're off the global cooldown, as well as interrupts, let's say. But let's take interrupts, racials, and trinkets on a separate thing, because they've already agreed that they should be off the global cooldown, no consequences. So we'll put those to one side. So we'll just remain with our throughput cooldowns, our defensives, and our movement speed. Whenever you use one of those abilities, it automatically puts the others on a 5-second cooldown. So you can't stack them, you can't macro them all together. If you use one, you can't use another one or one from that same lump of abilities in the same 5 seconds. So if, for example, you decide you want to do a DPS cooldown, oh, I can kill that person over there, but there's someone else killing you, that was their specific scenario, you can't just pop your most powerful defensive and offensive cooldown and attack that player, because as soon as you pop the defensive, it's 5 seconds before you can use your throughput cooldown. Solves the problem, but it doesn't. But it's still off the global cooldown, so it still allows you to use them naturally during your normal rotation. What the hell's wrong with that? Now, what I've done is I've created a post saying exactly this, and I've posted it on the official forums. I've put it on the NA forums in the beta area. So I would encourage you to go and check that out. If people want to also bring it up in the normal forums where everyone can post, that'd be great too. I'd definitely encourage people to do that. But that's what I'm going to do because it's a beta related issue. I know not everyone can comment on the beta ones, but these things do tend to get looked over a bit more on the beta forum. So that's where I want to put it, as it is an actual suggestion. So let me know what you think in the comments below, and preferably on the forum, which I'll link below. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share for further content. And until next time, I'll see you later.